that number is probably more a function of the biased Democrat-controlled mainstream media coverage and less about the actual choices. However, from a constitutional, conservative perspective, Trump is batting about 500 in his choices for his team. Joining me now from Southern California, author, speaker, and principal political analyst for the Independent Voter Network, TJ O'Hara. TJ, I give Donald Trump an A+ when it comes to national security and the military, the appointments he's had so far. When you look at Mattis and Kelly and Flynn, really strong choices. I approve 100%. But as I digest some of these other choices, it's giving me indigestion.
Well, I would agree with you. I think in national security, he's been very, very strong. I think the other appointments, some of them appear to be weak on the surface, and others are interesting. You made a comment about Tillerson, for example, for Secretary of State. I do think he'll be challenged because he's an easy target for establishment conservatives who'd like to emasculate the administration up front, kind of curb some of the power. So I do think he'll have a target on his back. Yeah. On the other hand, he has real-world expertise and he has established relationships, so he doesn't have to waste time building that emotional part of the negotiation element of Secretary of State. But right. Compare him to the past two. You have John Kerry, whose negotiation strategy is basically a one-trick pony type thing of roll over and play dead. And then he's also challenged, Tillerson that is also challenged from a standpoint of established relationships. Well, if you look at conflict of interest, I've got three words for you: the Clinton Foundation. Right. So compare and contrast secretaries of state, he may actually be an interesting choice.
He might. He's got obviously a learning curve. He's never had any kind of bureaucratic experience. I think that's a plus, actually. But what troubles me is, of course, the obvious ties to Russia. We know he's an American, and we assume his allegiance is with America, but maybe there's a little bit of a too close of a relationship there. And the other problem is that when you look at Foggy Bottom, there is deep-rooted systemic problems at the Department of State. Mainly, it has to do with an attitude of these bureaucrats where it's America second. And this entire department needs to be roto-rooted. And I don't know if he's the guy for the job or not. But when we look at the latest appointment, this guy Zinke for Interior, the Interior Department has so many sub-departments, it's almost hard to keep track. The Bureau of Indian Affairs, the Bureau of Indian Education, BLM, Bureau of Ocean Energy Management, you get the idea, it's bureau heavy. It's one of the largest departments there is. And this guy, Zinke, okay, he's a former Navy SEAL, but I don't know what kind of experience he's ever had in running a huge bureaucracy like this one.
Well, I think clearly the jury's out on Zinke. I don't have a lot of feel for what his position would be. I think he has a more moderate position relative to climate change. He says it's not a hoax. However, the science isn't well established, and that may play well in the Department of Interior. But as a freshman representative, I don't know that he has the experience to fill that type of position, but we'll see.
All right. When we look at Department of Energy, it's kind of ironic that Donald, you're snickering because Donald Trump chose Rick Perry. I think Rick Perry is a fine choice, but it was energy. It was the department that he infamously couldn't remember in the 2012 campaign. I hope that Donald Trump says to Rick Perry, here's the keys to the department, now close it. That's what I hope he does. And then when we look at Tillerson again, some of the problems I see coming up here. Number one, you talk about global warming. Supposedly, he believes in global warming. Condoleezza Rice and who was it, Robert Gates, give him a rousing endorsement. Well, both of those are registered lobbyists for Exxon. So there are some problems with this nomination for Secretary of State.
Well, sure. I think there are going to be some challenges, but in general, here's the way I feel about all of the appointments. If you look, we're in football season. We're starting to approach playoffs in the NFL. I'm going to throw two names at you: Tom Brady and Johnny Unitas.
All
they
right.
were picked in the 6th and the 9th round. Nobody thought either one of them could play, and they turned out when they were allowed to get in the game, they turned out to be two of the greatest quarterbacks of all time. So
I like the optimism.
Yeah.
I like it. Okay, so when we look at the economic team, Again, there's some red flags here. I call it the Millionaires Club. It actually might be called the Billionaires Club, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. But when you look at this guy, Steve Mnuchin, Goldman Sachs, this guy Gary Cohn, a top economic advisor, Goldman Sachs. Cohn apparently went into Donald Trump and said, hey, I have a vision, I have a plan for infrastructure spending, and that would be spending, from what we understand, somewhere around $1 trillion taxpayer dollars. Again, there's a couple of red flags that fly up in my face.
Well, I'm not as concerned about the billionaire status, and I think that's more accurate for the people that have been aligned in the economic side of the administration. They'll be tougher to buy off. The lobbyists will have to really ante up to buy these people off. But you look at Wilbur Ross, for example. You know, he's a person who restructures organizations. He has a major opportunity to restructure the Department of Commerce, and that's a challenge for him. Accusing him of being a billionaire, you have to look at who's in that position now. Well, it's Penny Pritzker. Penny Pritzker is a billionaire. So it's not as bizarre a circumstance as we might think. You do need people who understand the economy and understand it at a high level. And again, these are people I'd say, let them get on the field. Let's see how they can play. If they can throw the ball, great. And if they can't.
This guy Pudzner, though, open borders guy. Let's move on to EPA. I think this is a brilliant choice. It's scaring the daylights out of the environmentalists, the Scott Pruitt. Again, I would say your first order of business is to figure out a way to close the department. I don't think we need energy and EPA. I think either one or both should go away. Betsy DeVos, I've heard mixed reviews on her. She's a voucher person, which is great. I think this is exactly what the United States needs, but vouchers is a state-by-state thing. And so how much power is she going to have? Again, if I was President Trump, I would say your order of business is to undo Common Core, get the vouchers going on the state level, and then close your department.
That could happen, too. I mean, we have no idea what type of restructuring is going to go on. DeVos is another billionaire. She is for vouchers. She's for school choice. I think that's positive. She tends to be fairly evangelical, so there'll be an issue of her dealing with the prayer issue in public schools. I will tell you, I'm never going to criticize her because her brother started Blackwater Worldwide, and I'm not going to take the risk of criticizing her.
All right, but do you believe that this is, as the Heritage Foundation, somebody at the Heritage Foundation, I believe, said that this is the most conservative cabinet since Ronald Reagan. The bar has been lowered since Ronald Reagan, so anything looks pretty conservative, I will say. But are these the kind of people that are going to drain that swamp?
Well, I guess we're going to find out. These aren't people with track records in a lot of cases where we could look at it and say, this is the way these people address specific issues. But they do, generally speaking, have at least some real-world experience. And, you know, I'd look at it positively and say, well, let's let them play and see how it goes.
Well, when we start hearing talk of keeping parts of Obamacare, I worry because, you know, these people, these appointing, they know the swamp. They've been in the swamp. They're not necessarily part of the swamp, but they certainly are familiar with the swamp. And we just don't want them to dive in with all the other creatures in there. TJ, thanks.
You're welcome.